The video you're about to see as part of the intro today is from Gilad Erdan, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, addressing the changes in their position towards Russia, as well as many of the other things in the Middle East. The reason it's here as part of a Ukraine update is because they do address their support for Ukraine, how it's changed, and what their intentions are going forward. However, pulling those parts out without the context of the whole address makes for a very misleading situation. So I'm presenting it here intact, all 7 minutes of it, for you to make your own judgments as to how you feel about it. Thank you. And now to the address.
Mr. President, for the past 2 years, Israel has stood alongside the people of Ukraine in solidarity, both on the ground and here in the United Nations. This is the moral thing to do, especially as a country that knows exactly how it feels to be aggressively invaded, to have our towns and cities attacked, and for our civilians to be the targets of indiscriminate missile fire. The State of Israel has always and will continue to remain committed to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Distinguished representatives, Israel has shown its support for Ukraine not only through words, but also through actions. Israel sent more than 100 tons of humanitarian equipment to our Ukrainian allies within 1 week of the Russians' invasion. We also established a field hospital within Ukraine's border, which treated over 7,000 injured. Hundreds of Ukrainian patients have also been treated in hospitals and rehabilitation centers across Israel. From rehabilitation programs to post-traumatic therapy, Ukrainians have received the best possible care that Israel has to offer. Israel is also working to provide Ukraine with early warning systems to save civilian lives from Russia's indiscriminate missile and drone attacks. We were forced to develop an expertise in this field, and we are happy to share our capabilities with our Ukrainian friends in need. Colleagues, 2 years ago, Russia, with disdain for its neighbors' sovereignty and territorial integrity, invaded Ukraine, causing tragic loss of human life and immense damage to civilian infrastructure. 143 days ago, the brutal terror organization of Hamas, in utter violation of international law and also complete disdain for Israel's sovereignty, invaded the Jewish state, murdering, raping, and destroying anything they could lay their hands on. Both of our countries, Ukraine and Israel, are fighting a battle for our survival. We are now living in an era during which forces of instability act with impunity. International law be damned, morality be damned, and peace and security be damned. But today, not only do these forces use military power or terror, but they have another tool. They have converted the UN and its bodies into a weapon against freedom and liberty. This is what the UN has become. Today, the Security Council cannot fulfill its basic mandate to defend sovereign states from invasion or even condemn violence. Whether it comes to combating the aggression that Ukraine defends itself against or the terror that Israel defends itself against, the Security Council is paralyzed in the face of violence, and the entire UN system is being held hostage by political interests. The UN system is being held hostage by political interests. For purely political reasons, neither the Security Council nor this body has condemned Hamas or its massacre. The audacity of those who invade others and attack civilians to baselessly lecture the law-abiding democracy of Israel on international law is the perfect example of how destructive this institution has become. Listen to this. This week, Russia will be hosting a Hamas delegation in Moscow, and not for the first time. Russia is one of the only places outside of the Middle East where Hamas terrorists and Houthi jihadists are given the red carpet treatment, even after October 7th. Russia is hosting those who are responsible for intentionally murdering babies, raping women, and burning families alive. But this meeting in Moscow is a result of something more broad, more dangerous. Russia is now deepening its ties with global forces of destabilization. It is no secret that Hamas is merely one tentacle of Iran's terror armies. This horde of death and destruction includes Hezbollah, the Houthis, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terror organizations. They are funded, they are trained, they are armed and directed by Iran. Iran is responsible for the attacks on American service members. Iran is behind the Houthis' attacks on maritime trade, and it is Iran who supplies Russia with the drones that are attacking Ukrainian civilians. As we sit here now, focusing on words and not actions, an alliance is being strengthened and the international community stands idle. The axis between the Ayatollah regime in Tehran, the Assad regime in Syria, the Kim regime in North Korea, and the Maduro regime in Venezuela is deepening, and Russia is moving closer to them. These countries are now standing in solidarity as the free world stands on the sidelines, divided. Do you not see what we all face? Are you not worried about our values and interests? If the UN cannot do anything to prevent aggression, then there is no longer any justification for this organization to exist. If this body is incapable of standing up to violent attacks, yet demonizes those combating the threat posed to all of us, then the UN has lost all legitimacy. Ambassador Kislitsia, Israel will continue to stand by Ukraine. We have both experienced an invasion. We have both experienced brutalities. We will forever bear these scars. Yet, if inaction continues to be the modus operandi of this organization, every other member of the free world will eventually bear these scars too. We, Israel and Ukraine, are the canaries in the coal mine. To the rest of the free world, I say, wake up! Wake up! Thank you, Mr. President.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon, actually, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me today. That was Gilad Erdan, the ambassador to the UN, speaking about Israel's now rather surprising change in stance towards Ukraine. Yes, they've been allied all along, but they've been pretty quiet about it overall, though a couple of months back, that really changed. And we're now starting to see Israel calling out Russia as well as Iran, Venezuela, Syria, and North Korea, almost creating a new axis of evil. As the Israelis seem to have been finally decided they need to jump off the fence and get onto whatever side they're going to be on. My feel is that they've realized that their survival requires them to finally get off that fence and pick a side. And that is the situation from that side there. A lot of things going on in this world, and we're seeing a lot of these bad actors banding together. They were, for a long time, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, they've been kept kind of compartmentalized, separated, sort of isolated from each other and from the world at large. But as the world has become more interconnected, so have the dictatorships. The internet may be bringing together people across the world, but they're also bringing together dictators, bad actors, criminals, all in this ability to interoperate and coordinate in ways that perhaps were not possible in decades past. That said, Russia, they specifically, Israel addressed it as being Iran that was kind of the center, the spider at the center of the web, and Russia moving towards them. However, I would contend that this is a mutual relationship. They have both been working with each other for a very long time. I don't think Russia's being drawn towards Iran. I think the two have been working together for decades. And the continued working together is what is allowing Russia and Iran to destabilize the world, create this new situation that we are facing now. So look at this and see what you think. I wanted you to be able to make the full judgment yourself. Much as I watch and analyze and pay attention to these things, I want you to be able to know where they're coming from, why they're there, why they're at this juncture they're at. And the reason that Israel is at the juncture they're at is because Russia supported Hamas, directly or indirectly. We already know that Hamas representatives have been in Moscow multiple times now, along with other representatives trying to set up their little alliances and setups, things like that. So Russia is supporting one specific side. And Israel, despite having years of sitting on the fence, they'd be friendly with Russia and they'd be friendly with the West, and they'd kind of take a little bit from both sides and work together with everybody. Israel has realized that one of those partners was working towards their destruction. And now they've chosen their side. All right, that all said, let's go ahead and get into the meat of what's going on today. One of the things I will address in a little bit later here is Macron's commentary on potentially sending troops to Ukraine. I'm seeing some pushback on that, but I'm going to address all that a little bit later. Just want to give it a moment or two to settle a little bit more to see if there might be any other things pop out at the last possible second before I talk about that. In the meantime, let's talk about the situation that the Russians are trying to create a tremendous web of disinformation. And this is one of those examples. FSB agents went to an area of occupied Zaporizhia, and they raided a couple of houses. And they found in those houses a couple of chemicals, as they call it, in medicinal vials. And they declared that these were, in fact, chemical weapons. You can see them right here. Biosporin. Let me see if I can get a good picture of it here. There's one in here where it shows a fairly good close-up. There we go. Biosporin, they say, is an equivalent to the Russian nerve agent BZ. And it's produced by the U.S., they claim. Well, no. Biosporin is actually produced in Ukraine. It's a Ukrainian-manufactured a probiotic. It's meant for gut health, effectively. And so they're holding up these vials of probiotic, declaring that they are these chemical weapons. And the odds are they're doing this specifically for the purpose of normalizing the idea that both sides would be using chemical weapons. However, Russia's been using chemical weapons off and on almost throughout the conflict. Irritant agents, something, let me see if I can get it right here. Chloropicrine and some others that they've been using as chemical irritants, and therefore they're trying to create basically they're trying to say both sides do it. And that is one of the biggest challenges I've seen, because I've seen people claim, oh no, it was the Ukrainians that did it. And then when you say, no, the Ukrainians didn't do that, they go, no, both sides were doing it. Well, one of those sides did it first. And that one side is nearly every time Russia. Russia's been using these chemical agents in Ukraine, and now they're trying to set up a situation where they can claim that both sides were doing it. This is not exactly a new avenue of disinformation that Russia's putting out. They have been working on a new round of it that's been kind of in the works for the last several months. They've been doing the initial placement of the information to try and create this for their Medan 3 disinformation operation. This is supposed to culminate or come to its head in March to May of this year. This is going to be when they put in their maximum effort to spread narratives that are destructive to world security and attempts to incite conflicts. a big operation from Russia's side. The Russian Federation is trying to focus on the following areas of disinformation. The Russian Federation plans to spread panic and despair among Ukrainians and to quarrel Ukraine with its allies. You're seeing a lot of that in Poland, which we will address in a little bit here. They want to destabilize Ukraine in the first half of June and then take advantage of the situation by creating a military defeat in the east. Then they're going to spend a whole bunch of money on spreading anti-Ukrainian sentiments on Telegram, and the total operation of this enormous the total budget for it is $1.5 billion US. That is a lot of money put into disinformation. Understand that they were interfering with U.S. elections by spending a couple of $100 on Facebook. Spending $1 billion gives them a lot more reach. So be watching for those types of things. Now, Kirill Budanov has said that this operation they failed to implement it, is what he says. Now, it's supposed to start in March, or at least the culmination of it starts in March. So he's saying that Russia hasn't even managed to get the initial parts of it off the ground in time for this type of a launch of this psychological operation. In fact, he said this on the sidelines of the Forum Ukraine Year 2024, which took place on February 25th. I'll give you his account of it here. As part of this operation, they planned the following: to create a situation in which the legitimacy of decision-making in Ukraine after May 20th of this year would be questioned. After they were counting on a certain confusion in Ukrainian society in connection with this, which would be projected onto our army. After that, having sown double thoughts in our army, in the first half of June, they planned to inflict a military defeat in the east, taking advantage of the previously shaken situation in the army. But they will not be able to inflict a military defeat, and this special operation of theirs has already failed, again, according to Kirill Budanov. And that brings me to this little nugget right here. And this is from Simon Kustenmacher, who is a geographer and demographer, and he does maps and data. And he says, he shares an article, which is important reading on the insane bot flood here on Twitter, or X. And then he makes a prediction. In the long run, traditional news sites and niche subject matter experts will become more important as curators of content. And I can absolutely see where he's coming from on this. This is the link to his Twitter post, and within that is a link to the article in question. The truth is that the louder and the more I hate to say it this way, but obnoxious the information space becomes, the harder it is to sift it and sort it until you find good, valuable information. Our information sphere is being weaponized against us by Russia, by Iran, by North Korea. Believe it or not, North Korea has a tremendous amount of hacker mojo going on over there. They have been stealing and evading sanctions and all that kind of stuff using high-tech means for a long time. But they are literally using our openness against us. Therefore, watch the information you're receiving, check it against multiple sources, check it against multiple sources you can actually trust. I encourage that for anybody who even watches my videos. I provide multiple sources often, or even links to information when I have the opportunity. But understand that even that may not be enough for you to be convinced. And therefore, I encourage everybody to do their own research in addition. And try and put this together, at least on the individual pieces that you say to yourself, that doesn't feel right. So pay attention to those feelings, pay attention to those thoughts. You may find that you're getting more of that's not right than you might believe. Speaking of things that are not right, I should say, Jake Broey was asked for the link to, there's an Inspector General report on military aid given to Ukraine. People keep declaring there's no oversight. There's plenty of fraud. All the money's being lost. We're sending pallets of cash. We're doing all these things. There's an Inspector General who does basically nothing but pay attention to what's going on in Ukraine and doing the oversight for it. This is that report. Let me get it to the top here. The Special Inspector General report is required quarterly. The last one covered the time frame from October 1st to December 31st. They include things like addressing potential for fraud. Let me scroll down a bit. They've got some specific areas. Description of any waste, fraud, or abuse identified by the Special Inspector General. And they give the pages to that, so you can go straight to that information and find out where the fraud or waste is going that they've identified so far. Any large-scale operation of this type will be filled in some degree with corruption. There will be waste, there will be corruption, and the key is to root it out and punish it. The more you punish, the less likely people are to take the risk. And this is part of that aspect. We've seen several operations by Ukraine to find and root out this type of corruption, to find those who are on the take and get rid of them, prosecute them, confiscate the things, and then reapply them to the proper destinations. So if you're wondering exactly what they're seeing for fraud, waste, and abuse, Inspector General report right here. I'm going to put the link into the comments right now. So the end result is that, no, it's not just going into a black hole. That's one of the, I hesitate to call it debunking, but that's one of the talking points you hear a lot from people who are opposed to the war, and for very specific reasons. That is not to say there are not perfectly valid reasons to be opposed to the war. I am not saying that at all. What I am saying is that if you are opposed to the war in Ukraine, or more specifically supporting Ukraine in opposing Russia, at least you should do so with all of the facts in hand, and none of them based on Russian disinformation. All right, we can start getting into the meat of the news now, so let's go ahead and pick up from there. There's not a lot out of Ukraine itself, so we've only got this one article as of right now. 2023 became the year where the defense industry started running on a large scale and started making an impact on the front line. That's from Strategic Industries Minister Oleksandr Kamshin, who basically has been monitoring all of the industry in Ukraine. They are mobilizing everything. Little old ladies who used to knit are now putting together drones. People are putting together food and supplies and kits and making clothes and equipment. Everything they can in Ukraine. Some of them are even donating out of what little money they have in order to continue the war effort and try to stop Russia. There was, I don't remember which country it was, but one of the Baltic countries, they have been raising millions of euros from individual private donations to send to Ukraine to fight the war. And we're not talking about mega corporations or arms manufacturers. We're talking moms and pops and kids and average, normal citizens. So that's what we've got going on there. They've mobilized Ukraine's industry, and they've worked on it to become a big impact on the war. Let's go ahead and move forward to the news out of Russia itself. Russian presidential elections have begun in remote and occupied territories. This is early elections. I believe the actual elections are next week, as I recall, early March, or is it late March? Could be late March. But overall, they've started the operation. Early voting like this in these remote areas, as they're basically trying to make it so people can vote in those occupied areas, where it's very likely that Russia's already got their corruption game lined up. Moscow police seized some special equipment and a camera that were installed in front of the Russian Ministry of Defense, thinking that it was some kind of Ukrainian spy operation. Well, they did some more digging and messed around with the equipment and checked everything out. It turned out it was Russia's own FSB that was spying on the Ministry of Defense. They really don't trust themselves over there. From Crimean Wind, this is interesting here. Russian missile carriers or their ships in the Black Sea have not left their bases for more than a week. They don't provide a really robust reason for this. However, it's noteworthy that Russia has lost a couple of A-50s recently. In fact, overall missile operations have greatly reduced with the loss of both of those A-50s. And it's likely they were used in order to actually bring reasonable targeting and make the best use of those missiles. So interesting, something to pay attention to. Speaking of something to pay attention to, according to Crimean Wind, 2 Russian military transports, the Yaz and the Sparta 4, transporting weapons and ammunition from Syria, turned 180 degrees last night and rushed south. The first is in Port Said. For the second, the destination is indicated as Mediterranean Sea. And in the area of the Dardanelles Strait, both ships are anchored. Well, they don't know why. And they're theorizing here. I'm not going to address what they're theorizing. But perhaps they're discovering that there might be some risks in running those ships into the Black Sea at this point in time, especially if it's known that they have military cargo on both of them. The Russian government is planning to ban the export of gasoline starting in March for a total of 6 months. This will greatly restrict Russia's ability to bring in money. But the reason is because if you look at all the details, the damage that's been inflicted on their oil infrastructure by Ukraine is not repairable, at least not in the short term. They do not have access to Western replacements for the pumps and equipment and the stuff that handles this oil pumping and refining. So therefore, they're not able to get those back together. They're trying to stabilize the situation and move forward, but in that meantime, they're going to find it's hard to keep operating, at least for a little while. According to official data, let me bring this up so it's a little easier to read. According to official data, there are roughly 2 million Russians working in the military-industrial complex now. And now they're theorizing that what if the Putin regime, with no other economic sources of growth apart from military production, can they structurally even afford to abandon the politics and culture of endless war? The people who say, the people who keep saying, well, Russia's doing it Russia's doing it for his own country. They may be right. They may be right in that if Russia's economy collapses if they stop going to war, why would they stop going to war? Something, food for thought. A shopping center is on fire in the Kursk region. Just an interesting aside, they do manage to have enough equipment to work on the fire this time, though there's been indications that they've had a lot of shortages of fire-capable personnel and equipment in order to fight these fires. Hi, Lucille. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you on board, as well as Jerry. We're about halfway through it today, so just sit back, relax, and hope you go back and watch the beginning. You'll probably find some interesting stuff there. From the Ukrainian Review, after the shooting down of the second Russian A-50, Russia did not observe the use of such aircraft for several days. It looks like Russia's having trouble keeping these A-50s in the air. They only have, I think, 7 left, And we don't know what operational status those are in. But even harder than the aircraft themselves are the crew members to operate them. They've lost 2 full crews for these aircraft, meaning they're going to have trouble getting more trained up and up to speed and up to snuff. Interesting, and for Russia, concerning, very concerning. And we'll end off with, on the Russian side, with, again, the section I call Ruski Mir. Pro-Russian military medic and blogger Yuri Yevich states that since he is not a fascist, sadly, he cannot send millions of civilians into concentration camps. But clearly he wants to. He says the only way to stop world wars is to burn everything up and beyond the English Channel and round up and hang everyone who spoke against Russia. And only then the Europeans will stop touching Russians, though he didn't specify who touched him and how. So this is the rhetoric that the Russians are working on. There's no indications that they're having any intention to stop, except for long enough to rearm, re-equip, and then move forward again. Brief pause here so I can allow for any questions and take a brief drink. So if you have any questions, now's a good time. Also, if you're here, hit me with that old thumbs up and, appreciate that if you're enjoying today's stream, at least being informed by it. One of these days, I'm going to get around to actually making a nice graphic and with maybe a little animation on it that says that stand by, or technical difficulties, or hold on just a moment. Something that when I'm taking a drink, I can actually just get my face off the screen instead of leaving either a black screen or, a black screen like this, or, just sitting here with the camera on. But that day is not today. So let's go ahead and keep on going here. We've got stuff going on in the international side. In fact, let me go through and quickly hit the translate on all of these so they are ready to go when I get there. Had to restart my browser shortly before the start of the stream. So everything is kind of just needs refreshed and put together. Paul, glad to have you on board as well. And thank you all for joining me today. I always appreciate you guys being here and enjoy your company and your comments. So yeah, please keep the conversation going. Any questions or comments, I do pay attention and I do appreciate every single one. Get this translated as well. Just about there. One of the problems of looking in so many different news sources and languages is having to go through and get it all translated so I can actually talk about it effectively. It's a challenge. All right, let's go ahead and move on to I'm going to move that piece over to there and come back to that in a moment. Okay. The Brits are sending over a new type of armored mine and route clearance vehicle. Looks like a skid steer with a flail on the front. It's for mine clearing and for large areas of it. Now they do show an operator inside and what looks like a remote control capability. So I don't know how this would work overall, but it's interesting to see. Should be very useful for Ukraine to be able to get some of their land operating at least better. And you want to bet they're going to find a way to use this in combat. I'm not going to bet against them. According to South Korea, Pyongyang, or North Korea, sent nearly 7,000 ammunition containers to Russia. As you can see on the front lines, Russia's got the ammunition. They've got the artillery shells, and they're laying waste to villages and towns in order to take them. This is why they have got so much ammunition coming in from North Korea that they're able to just plaster whole areas in order to be able to take them. They're leaving effectively nothing in their wake. Latvia has extended an entry ban for Russian citizens to until March of 2025. A whole year that Latvia is not letting any Russians come in. France and the Netherlands are now backing the Czech plan to buy ammunition for Ukraine outside of the EU. Again, we mentioned this one in the previous video. That would be stuff from the South Africa, the area of Africa there, and from South Korea. Apparently, there's other sources as well that they've found a whole bunch of artillery shells they can bring in. Macron has announced a coalition to send Kiev long-range missiles. France and other allies, he says, will create a coalition for deep strikes and therefore medium and long-range missiles and bombs. This is a vital part of prosecuting and winning the war for Ukraine. The Swedes are saying there's going to be a fast decision on whether to send Gripen fighters over to Ukraine. They're pretty motivated right now. The Netherlands are allocating 100 million. Okay, that's also, we already mentioned that one already. 100 million euros is nothing to sneeze at, though. Here's where things get a little bit interesting. Ukraine is claiming that some Russian drones flew over Moldova, but Moldova's denying this and said during Monday's attack that there were attacks on the western side of Ukraine that were coming from Moldovan airspace. Now, were these necessarily from Moldovan airspace? Maybe. They may also have been from Transnistria. But either way, it's clear that Russia is trying their darndest to weaponize that Transnistrian region and bring that piece into the war. North Korean factories are operating at full capacity to supply munitions to Russia. Kim Jong-un has got to be over the moon having Russia over the barrel like this. He's got to be just absolutely ecstatic. He's wanted to have somebody begging him for stuff for so long. It's a big boost to his ego, but it's also a big boost to North Korea's economy, which has been suffering under sanctions for a very long time. So this could be a big boon to North Korea, who's already been getting extra aggressive with their missile tests and additional armament actions like that. French airplanes escorted a Russian IL-20 off the coast of Estonia. They were scrambled as that aircraft was coming into pretty close to Estonian airspace. That's a comprehensive reconnaissance aircraft. Interesting to see France start to step up in a certain way because they've been kind of a little bit flaky. Not flaky is not the right word, but reserved in their support until now. The European Parliament voted for a new aid fund for Ukraine worth 50 billion euros, with a solid 536 MEPs for it and 40 against. This one I thought was particularly hypocritical. From Hungary, according to Viktor Orban, Hungary wouldn't want to have a common border with Russia because it has bad memories of the times when it had a common border with the USSR. One of the most important principles of Hungary's national security is that to our east, there should be an entity located between Russia and Hungary. Thus, we are helping Ukraine based on the national interests of Hungary. Quite the 180 in its rhetoric. And I don't know how I feel about it because it seems like Viktor Orban had to be virtually bribed to not support Russia and to allow support to go to Ukraine. So it feels politically motivated. I'll put it that way. And yes, Paul, Orban is full of it. That's why it feels very hypocritical to talk about him in this context and why I'm worried about it. Ukraine has received a $760 million grant from Japan and Norway through the World Bank's Peace in Ukraine mechanism. These will cover priority state budget expenditure. So they're helping support the budget of Ukraine to keep them working and fighting and keep making so they can dedicate their resources to actually fighting the war. Okay, I've got a brief pause here for before we get into Macron's comments and the other responses we're seeing right here. So I'm going to take a pause, just kind of read through your comments. Ozzy says electronic warfare is apparently one of the fields that the Russian army does reasonably well. And that is absolutely correct. Apparently, they've got real effective electronic warfare game going on over there. It's effective, but it's not agile. As in, as Ukraine changes, Russia finds it difficult to adjust their tactics, but they do over time. And when they do, they seem to be very robust in their abilities there. Everything I've seen has really given top marks to Russia's electronic warfare capabilities. Paul says Orban's next move is his next chance to sell out. Exactly. And Lucille points out politically motivated equals untrustworthy. Absolutely. All right, let's go ahead and move on to Macron and the big news from this from the last 24 hours. French President Emmanuel Macron has allowed the possibility of sending Western troops to Ukraine in the future, then said there's no consensus among allies on this issue. This is quite the change for Macron. He has been pretty well, like I said, a little bit reserved in how he's acted in the past. And so when he said this, there was a whole lot of backlash to it. This kind of talks about the whole meeting they had with all of them. And I want to kind of just review this with Crimean Wind, but I'm going to move it to the end and talk about the rest of the troop situation here. The U.S. has stated they will not be sending troops to Ukraine. And NATO and 4 European countries say they are not considering sending troops to Ukraine. That would be Jens Stoltenberg, Germany, Sweden, Poland, and Czechia, who are all saying they are not considering deploying their troops to Ukraine. Polish President Andrzej Duda, however, confirmed that at this meeting in Paris, they did discuss sending NATO soldiers to Ukraine. He said that this was the sharpest discussion and there was no absolute agreement, with opinions differing, and there were no such decisions. So Macron kind of put it out there into the public space. Polish President Andrzej Duda has confirmed that was a matter of discussion, but that there were sharp divisions in this one here. And at this point, I'm going to point out that there is no requirement that any troops sent be sent under the NATO umbrella. So if a country decides to send troops to Ukraine, they are absolutely able to without actually drawing NATO into it, because they can do so without calling on NATO to do so. Interesting to see this conversation taking place now. Crimean Wind kind of summarized this whole meeting, saying that French President Emmanuel Macron stopped fearing escalation of the conflict for a reason, but under pressure from a number of Eastern European countries. New members of the European community believe that the Kremlin could attack one of them as early as this year. That is why the Eastern Bloc is so proactive in helping Ukraine. Macron's position, among other things, gives Paris a chance to regain leadership within the EU against the backdrop of Berlin's conservatism and kind of the, as he calls it, leisurely Washington. So France could take the lead in this. Poland has really kind of been taking a lot of the aggressive lead. And to have Poland showing up France is kind of a blow to French ego, in my opinion. So Macron is taking over Biden's security leadership in Europe quite dramatically, with the U.S. apparently having to step back at this point in time. France and Germany are supposed to step up and fill the gap. So we're going to see if that works out and how that's going to turn in the long run. The French president's statements include a new coalition on creating a supply to Ukraine with long-range missiles and ammunition. The European Union purchasing shells for Ukrainian armed forces outside of the EU. French Mirage fighters are potentially there. There was discussions of that last week. So there's a possibility that France could start sending fighters, and France's fighters are nothing to sneeze at. Good, sturdy, capable equipment. And of course, not ruling out sending Western forces. A lot of what it came down to is that France is saying we cannot let Russia win. It would be disastrous to the European Union. It would be disastrous to the world if Russia wins. In the end, it came down to nothing should be ruled out. So that's the whole situation with Macron and the potentially sending troops to Ukraine. Clearly, at this point in time, there's no political will for it. But the trial balloon has been floated. And once the trial balloon has been floated, well, let me put it this way. They said no way were Western powers going to send tanks. Then Poland sent tanks. Then the U.S. promised tanks. Then Germany sent tanks. Then the U.S. sent tanks. And other European countries sent tanks. Then they said there's no way we're going to provide planes. And then somebody sent planes. Not a lot. They were all, old Soviet fighters. But we're starting to see the signs of F-16s now. Modern, capable. Of course, F-16 is 40 years old, but it's been upgraded and modernized in many ways. So we're starting to see Western fighters. Now the trial balloon's been put up for Western troops. And I think if the situation continues to deteriorate, we may find the motivation is there for European countries to send troops. All of this could have been prevented if full levels of military hardware had been sent a year ago, 18 months ago, or even 6 months ago. But that's my opinion. Let's go ahead and move on to what's going on in Poland, which is getting weirder by the day. Polish law enforcement officers detained UP journalist, I guess it may be up, Mikhailo Chkach at the border near Belarus when he was filming material on the transit of the products between Poland and Russia and Belarus. They detained the reporters. They confiscated their camera gear. After 4 hours, they were kept and interrogated. They finally returned their documents and equipments, and when they checked it, some of their footage was missing. Not sure exactly how I feel about this, because we're pretty big about press freedom, and I'd be concerned exactly what was going across the Belarus-Poland border. We know that about 4 or 5 times the amount of Russian grain is going across that border. And I wonder if that is what had the Polish police a little bit concerned. I see we've got some comments here. Paul is saying Macron is showing the risk of current appeasement. Yep, absolutely. And adding that I'm sure the USA would rather he said it after the U.S. funding bill. But he is right to talk tough early rather than appeasing until the troops are needed. Absolutely. And he's floating that trial balloon is what I believe. Getting it out there in the public space that, considering how it's gone so far, it may be needed if they're going to stop Russia. Make no mistake, it's not about saving Ukraine for many of these. It's about stopping Russia. Ozzy says, little green men on holiday from France, a la Putin's play in Crimea. You know what? That would be an interesting play there to have the unofficial troops show up, if you know what I'm saying. I wonder if Western troops in Ukraine would open the doors for Iran, North Korea, and potentially others to send troops on the other side. That is an interesting thought, Ozzy. And I'll tell you straight up, Russia's already recruiting from anywhere they can find them. I absolutely believe that if Iran and North Korea thought they could get away with it, they would already be involved. That could be an excuse for them to send it. But what actual capabilities could Iran and North Korea provide? North Korea has, I believe, one of the largest by numbers militaries in the world, as in just huge numbers of soldiers under arms. I'd have to look up the number now. They could provide bodies for meat waves. And since Russia is big on the meat wave attack, that would be quite the change in the front lines. And if it happened, yeah, it would be rough, because they could literally outfit hundreds of meat wave attacks with just what North Korea could send. The thing is that North Korea also has its own military motivations. So if I was Kim Jong-un, I would be reluctant to send more than token numbers of troops, because I'm looking at South Korea and I've got designs on reunification. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Iran, for its part, is focused on primarily countering the U.S. and destroying Israel. So them sending troops to Ukraine to support the Russian army there, I don't think they've got the resources to make a significant impact. The one of those two that's concerning is North Korea, from the sheer number of literal bodies involved. All of this, of course, either side would be basically, either side does it, we've entered World War III. The only question is, can we keep it from being nuclear? Just keep that in mind. That's where we're at. And again, that could have been prevented if proper levels of military hardware and equipment and support had been sent a year ago. So there we go. That's my thoughts on that. And let's go ahead and move back to the Polish farmer protest. So the Polish farmers are going to stage another mass protest against Ukrainian imports and the EU Green Deal. They've got some legitimate beefs with the green initiatives over there in the European Union, driving up their costs, but not allowing them to recoup them through the sales. So I can see some legitimate beefs there, but they're destroying the wrong grain if they want to actually make that commentary. They should be destroying the Russian grain. They're still blocking 6 checkpoints on the border with Ukraine. They're letting a small number of trucks through, but they still have 2,100 sitting in queues. That is a lot of trucks just sitting and waiting. And Poland has said, as they're working on dealing with the situation with their farmers and truckers, we're discussing with the Ukrainian side the temporary closure of the border and the cessation of the exchange of goods. And they're going to discuss this with these farmers. Interesting to see. And it could be that the deal might be, look, Ukraine sends its agricultural exports through a different route, and we will make sure that the military hardware keeps going through, or vital assistance keeps going through. I don't know. That's only theorizing at this point, but it feels problematic. This feels like, considering we've already seen the hammer and sickle flying on one of those tractors as part of these protests, I have concerns about how they're dealing with this. But I'm not in Poland, and I cannot make any calls there. Oh, Ozzy says the leader of the Polish farmers' protests was shown in a photo standing with the Russian ambassador. Oh, I have not seen that one. Interesting, very interesting. And that would really kind of give you something new to think about in the terms of the farmer protests. Thank you very much, Ozzy. I'll have to watch out for that picture. That does take us to the front lines, however, where we've got things still not going well overall for Ukraine. Starting off, another 2 Russian Su-34 fighters were downed in the last 24 hours. I believe that makes 10 total aircraft in 10 days. So Ukraine is stepping up their air game, and while to make up for some of the losses they're taking on the ground, understanding that right now Ukraine is trading land for time to prepare better defensive fortifications and to prepare their troops better to stop Russia at this point in time. If they can get additional resources, that changes the mathematics. But until then, they have to buy some time with land. Let's get into what's going on the front lines. The big bits of this are near Stepova and Krasnohorivka. Let's go ahead and get this, kind of show how this is here. Now, this is Stepova, which was familiar from the conversations we had about the Avdiivka situation. It's north of the coke and chemical plant, and it looks like Russia has taken this area pretty much outright, including expanding south and west of Stepova. The other area is Krasnohorivka. Now let's zoom out so we can get a little bit of context here. That would be just outside of Donetsk and north of Marinka. Krasnohorivka has kind of been holding on. Let me get this right there. Okay, perfect. But we can see Russia starting to move across some of the open terrain and towards the city itself. Russian forces, according to the Institute for the Study of War, are attempting to exploit tactical opportunities offered by the Russian seizure of Avdiivka and appear to be maintaining a relatively high tempo of offensive operations aimed at pushing as far as possible in the Avdiivka area before Ukrainian forces establish more cohesive and harder to penetrate defensive lines in the area. This is one of the things we were discussing before. The longer Russia manages to hold onto their offensive, the more land that Ukraine's going to have to give up before they can truly establish their defensive lines. And that's what Russia's trying to do, is push that line as far back as they can get away with. That said, there's already been reports that troops have been transferred out of the Avdiivka area now that they're making significant progress in order to open up other areas of the front and make things far more problematic for Ukraine itself. War Gonzo's overall frontline report does acknowledge the changes in the front lines over in the Avdiivka area, and I went through his entire report. Interestingly enough, no other area of the front is showing signs of significant changes. He talks about the assaults towards Robotyne, which I note that he says from the west and south towards the village of Robotyne, even though a previous report that they made said that they were in Robotyne itself. This says that Russia knows that their initial report was a little bit too optimistic for them. So no real changes in the lines anywhere else, though there are a lot of tough battles. In particular, areas to keep an eye on are, of course, Kupiansk. But there's an interesting comment about the Serbianki forest area south of Dobrova. Now that is, kind of move up here, get a little bit of an outside look at this. That would be this area right here. And if we go zoom in some more, this whole forested area, they've been going back and forth. Burning a lot of the territory as they do so. So this area has been an area of active combat, but it's been relatively static for a few weeks now. If the Russians are able to actually push through and get to the Donetsk River down here, that would allow them to effectively secure more of this territory and maybe push towards the river on this side, creating further issues for further troops further north, for the Ukrainian troops further north. The Kiev Independent has officially confirmed that the military leadership is confirming the withdrawal from Stepova and Severne near Avdiivka. A lot of this is just the results of having to pull back at this time. So the movement of the lines is as Ukraine does a fighting withdrawal in order to slow down the Russians, and the Russians are trying to push it as fast as they can to disrupt the Ukrainians. Heavy battles are also being reported in the Bakhmut direction as Russia is pulling in their reserves, with intense fighting taking place as the Russians attempt to advance towards Chasiv Yar. Yes, I will avoid, I will not read that aloud, Paul. I've got you. I got you covered, man. But yeah, I understand the sentiment. But there's a lot of battles heading towards Chasiv Yar. Let's go ahead and get that pulled up here so we can kind of get some context. Here's Bakhmut. Bakhmut on the right, Chasiv Yar on the left. Russia's been trying to push for Chasiv Yar for pretty much the last year, and they've not made any significant progress, though there has been indications of small gains just south of Kromova here. This is the picture, I hate to say it that way, but this is the picture of one of the Su-34 fighters that were down the other day. It doesn't look like much, but it was a cell phone picture of a screen. So, interesting that they've actually got photo evidence of a Su-34 breaking apart in midair. Obviously, it's not the easiest thing to see, but at this point, the interpretation at least makes sense. They get a little cocky about shooting down airplanes. Oops, we did it again, says defensive Ukraine. And the situation around Avdiivka. This is towards Berdichi. I hate that this picture is so small. You can see that Null Reports is acknowledging the loss of Stepova itself, with the Russian troops actually showing their colors in that area. War Mapper talks about the situation in the Avdiivka area and says that they're expecting Ukraine to fall back to natural and built defensive positions behind the settlements of Toninke and Orlivka at the very least. That'll be the green line here. Let me get this pulled up to see if you can. Yeah, you can see it pretty decently. With a fallback line farther back, which you can see kind of goes off the end of the screen there. But yeah, that's the situation in Avdiivka. Pretty rough. But there's one little bit of interesting news here, and this is from Supernova Plus. The Antonovsky Bridge area. Russians are requesting heavy equipment because they're seeing a huge influx of Ukrainian forces around the Antonovsky Bridge. Now, we've not talked much about Krinky or the Dnipro River for a while here. Let me go ahead and move over that direction. There's not been significant changes. There were the other day around Krinky here. The Ukrainians managed to capture a little bit more territory over here. But they're talking about Neroleshki here, the Antonovsky Bridge. And while the Ukrainians have managed to maintain this presence right along the river itself and pushing in at various places, you can see how big the gray zone is here. We've not seen much more. And if the Russians are now calling for heavy equipment, it could mean that there's been a real buildup of Ukrainian forces across the river. We'll be watching this one closely. And that's the situations on the front lines. Brief pause so I can get a drink of water. Let's see. I'm reading your commentary, Ozzy and Paul. I won't read those out loud, though, so... Once again, I do want to say that I do appreciate all of you being here, and I'm glad to see your conversations going back and forth. It really does delight me to see the comments going around, and I appreciate it oh so much. All right, let's move on to the interesting extras, and these are going to be a little bit eclectic today, just because that's what kind of caught my eye as I was going along. Still, there's some interesting things here, and I think you'll appreciate some of them. Let's see, pause that, move it back. Oh my heavens. Yeah, I'm going to have to turn that sound off. Yes, okay, there we go. And that's okay. Everything's ready here. Let's go ahead and jump into it now. Just kind of some of it's just interesting news I picked up across the world as I was going along. From BBC Russian, Apple has decided to curtail the development of an electric car. Employees will be transferred to the AI department. AI, of course, is the hot big thing right now. But electric cars, it looks like other manufacturers are leaving the industry to Tesla. And it looks like it looks like that whole sector is becoming very much a one-man show, in my opinion. Censors absolutely threw a snit fit over the film Mary Poppins, claiming the word Hottentot was in fact racist and evil and all this kind of stuff. So they've now raised the rating from G to PG. Of course, this is in Britain, so they have a different rating system. I'm just converting it to U.S. systems for me. Night Watch from the defense of Ukraine. Isn't it interesting how, I mean, this is straight out of World War II. You'd use spotlights to find your targets, and then you'd illuminate those targets and then shoot them down. It's amazing to me that we have gone in some ways full circle in this war. Gone from, high tech to low tech to high tech. And now we're seeing a circling right back. We're seeing Russians deploying tanks that were designed and built right after the World War II. And we're seeing Ukrainians shooting down modern drones and missiles using tactics right out of World War II, spotlights trained on the target so they can shoot it down. In that same vein, a Ukrainian mobile anti-drone team engaged a Russian Shahed drone with an M2 Browning heavy machine gun, hitting it at least once and causing the drone to crash just a few meters away. I imagine that might have been a little bit stressful for that anti-aircraft crew. And this is just weird here. You can see a picture on the right, this kind of disc-shaped thing. This disc-shaped, completely silent, undetected flying object was seen on one of the drone cameras. They weren't able to identify it. There is apparently an error message at the top of the drone, so no telling exactly what might have been going on. But just interesting to see. I don't think anybody had aliens visiting Ukraine on their bingo list for 2024, but if you did, there you go. You can mark it off. A large, uncontrolled wildfire near the Pantex plant located 17 miles northeast of Amarillo in Carson County, Texas. The Pantex plant is the primary U.S. nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility, and there are local voluntary evacuations happening now. This is interesting. Now, wildfires in the U.S. are not unusual in and of themselves. I understand that this wildfire has effectively encircled a town. And this might be where that town is, that Pantex plant. It seems odd. especially when you look at it in context of all of the fires we've had at food production facilities. I'm not going to get all conspiracy theorist on you here. I'm just kind of laying out a few things I've noticed. We've seen fires at food production facilities in the U.S. and similar to that. And now we're seeing a fire that just happens to be around a major nuclear weapons facility in the U.S. Interesting to see. I will let you draw your own conclusions. I'm not going to address that any more than just to mention that until I see more evidence one way or another to confirm the weird suspicions I might have in my head. I don't like doing the conspiracy theory thing at all. I can tell you that. And I'm not going to get into it here. Have you ever seen a special forces cat? This cat is extremely classified, so we have to obscure its face. And in case you can't see it, you can see there's a bar. Looks like a guy took a piece of black cardboard, put it over his eyes, and they did the same thing to the cat, though it could have been just done in post. Made me laugh. It's just hilarious to me. In fact, it looks like it was probably done in post. But just fun. The Ukrainians got to have a little bit of fun every once in a while. And that's everything for today. Do you have any questions here? Paul mentions that there are wildfires in that plain area often, and he drives around there for work. So yeah, that's interesting. It just feels unusual to me, but you probably know better than I do, and that's the reason why I'm not willing to indulge in flights of fancy on such interesting bits of news. The overall situation that I want to point out is that I try to bring you the information I can confirm. And I try to make it clear when I'm expressing my opinion as opposed to actually being able to provide you facts. Because I think there are way too many people who do nothing more than provide wild, fanciful speculation. And not enough people who are going to give you the facts as best they've been able to find them. And that's what I endeavor to do over here. So on that note, it's absolutely crazy day, and the situation in Ukraine is deteriorating on the ground, but there are still positive signs over in the Black Sea and in the Crimea and various parts. It's going to rely Ukraine's future, as much as it probably hurts Ukrainians to say it, relies heavily on the actions of the West. Their future is not in their hands. And if it was me in that situation, I'd be scared as all get out. So, hopefully things will break soon as far as the impasse that we're seeing on getting real support over to Ukraine. But we will see what turns up in the end and keep on reporting the facts for you. And that's everything again for today. Thank you for joining me. Give me that thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. Glad you were here as well as always. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.